The 1940s were a pivotal decade for the history of cameras. Of course, it was an equally pivotal decade with World War II in the history of the world. I'm Laszlo Vasco. This is Micro Adventures, where we've been looking at 130 years of cameras in action. This episode is looking at the 1940s and the change of events that would sort of pivot the way countries and were manufacturing cameras. So let's take a look at some of the cameras that were coming out right at the beginning, or basically at the end of the 30s, and were widely used in the 1940s. And these were mainly the 35 millimeter cameras that were now coming to the market for consumers. In the US, you had cameras like the Argus A series, which some credit to be the most important camera in the history of US, given its role in popularizing photography for the masses. It was a very inexpensive camera made in large numbers in Ann Arbor, Michigan by the Argus Corporation, with a collapsible lens design and, sort of a very simple design with shutter speeds from 25 to 200, a simple f/4.5 lens, and no rangefinder, but just a simple viewfinder, etc. And this was, followed by Kodak as well. Kodak, of course, releasing the 35 millimeter canister itself in 1934, but coming out with the Kodak 35 in 1938, an equally or even simpler design. This one is metal, and it has an f/5.6 lens and shutter speeds of only 25 to 100. So not a lot of features on this, but its simplicity and robustness led this to also be used in World War II. There was sort of a olive drab version of it, and didn't quite catch on as much as Argus. So Argus actually was leading, especially when Argus came out with the C3. The C3 being the most manufactured, or longest manufactured camera in US history, and with its very unique brick construction that people just fell in love with, and its geared rangefinder design. So as you focused, the rangefinder would adjust with these external gears. This is a C3. This is a slightly later evolution of it, where you were able to add a light meter, and but the C3 itself looked the same through its history, although initially they were all black instead of this colorful version that came out. This particular one came out after World War II. But equally elsewhere in Germany, we had Voigtlander also coming out with a if I can open it up, but coming out with the Vito series for general, here we go, for general consumption. 35 millimeter folding camera, as you saw, it folds down in a nice, compact fashion. There we go, the buttons on the bottom, I was looking for that. But with a more sophisticated f/3.5 color scope part, Tessar equivalent lens, and shutter speeds from 1 second to 250. So a more sophisticated camera per se, but still meant for mass consumption. And equally in Japan, I don't have the very first Japanese 35 millimeter camera, but it was Canon that came out in 1936 with the Hansa Canon camera, based on a very similar design to Leica. In fact, many manufacturers were copying or taking the ideas from either Leica or Zeiss's Contax designs, in the 1940s. And so anyway, so Japan as well, were starting to make 35 millimeter cameras, and gave rise to a number of different manufacturers. And then as World War II rolled along, Kodak came out with the Kodak Medalist camera. a beautiful, very beautiful medium format camera shooting 6:9 sized images on 620 film, which is the same size as 120 film, just on a thinner spool. And this being designed by Walter Teague, the industrial designer who designed things like the Steinway piano, and as well as architected some well-known buildings. But he collaborated with Kodak on a number of designs, and which was sort of unusual. U.S. manufacturers sort of set themselves apart, not just in the 40s, but also subsequently in the 50s, by collaborating with a designer on their design and putting a larger emphasis on looks, and perhaps not as much on usability per se, because it's a very awkward camera to hold. And in terms of the technical design itself, it was designed by Joe Mihai, who designed Kodak's other highly regarded, like the Kodak Ektar and the Kodak Bantam Special, beautifully designed cameras. These were all penned by Joe Mihai, who was a Hungarian immigrant actually to the US, who worked at Kodak to make Kodak's best cameras with the aim of competing on a world-class level. And this indeed was a world-class camera that helped win the war. It featured a 5-element Kodak Ektar lens. Kodak gave the Ektar designation to its highest caliber lens, so it doesn't specify a lens formula. Instead, it specified the fact that it was their best lenses. This particular lens is known, it's a 100 millimeter f3.5 lens that is known to be very, very sharp, and helping the Navy and other armed forces to leverage this for reconnaissance and other activities, where with the large medium format size, they were able to zoom in on the subsequent images and be able to pick out details. So a very important camera, and a very uniquely designed, beautiful one. I will be featuring this. I'm aiming to put 620 film in it and go ahead and shoot this and take some images with this. I'm hoping to review this for you in more detail, including its unique features like this collapsible lens design that is an all-in-one focusing mechanism and an external aluminum helicoid that you could observe. So please come back for that. I'm really excited to try that out. So other manufacturers too. We have the Ciroflex TLR coming out in originally at the end of the 1930s as well. So these were made through the 40s. This is Model E, and it's the reason actually I bought this. Well, I'll explain that in a little bit, but I'm hoping to fool around with it because it doesn't work, and I want to be able to take its shutter apart. It featured a Wollensok lens and shutter assembly that is the same as in the Ansco Automatic, and I'm hoping to work on this to be able to learn how that is put together. But long story short, a fairly, I would say, mediocre camera. You can feel that it was more of it wasn't aiming to compete with Rolleiflex, but a sound, I guess, robust camera in itself. So, and there were, a number of these worldwide or different manufacturers that were continuing to make, of course, the various either folding or twin lens reflex style medium format cameras. So once World War II wrapped up, there was a gap or an opportunity that Ansco, noticed in terms of the unavailability of high-end German cameras, and jumped on that opportunity along with Kodak as well. You know, Kodak after the Medalist, you know, this is the Medalist 2 coming out right at the end of World War II. So they were definitely promoting this as a way to capture the high-end market. Ansco themselves, who were at this time government-controlled actually, the U.S. government basically broke up their partial ownership by or joint ownership with ACFA during World War II. So after World War II, they came out with the Ansco semi-automatic, which was a deliberate effort to create a Rolleiflex competitor and a high-end and, I would say again, beautifully designed. I did cover this camera earlier, but you know, a high-end camera. This was designed by Henry Dreyfuss, who, you know, designed New York Central's streamlined steam locomotives and some other things. So same approach, working with an industrial designer similar to Kodak in coming out with a very unique and an attractive twin lens reflex camera. I will also be loading this with film and shooting it. So I'm going to be, you know, not comparing them, but I'm going to be featuring both of these cameras in more detail. So what was happening then in Germany and Japan? Starting with Japan, Japan didn't quite get as, you know, so in Germany, the issue was that Dresden got totally demolished, where a lot of the Zeiss factory and some of the other German manufacturers were. In West Germany with Leica, it didn't get impacted as much, so they were able to resume production faster. In Japan, it was also, you know, a similar situation, but things got up running fairly quickly. And this is the Olympus 35, one of the first cameras to come out. This one came out in 1948. I think Minolta came out with the Minolta 35 in 1947. I believe that was the first post-World War II camera or 35mm camera in Japan. And this was perhaps the second. But anyway, one of the earliest post-World War II 35mm cameras. What's really neat with Olympus, and this was, of course, Olympus's first 35mm camera, both Minolta and Olympus. Well, you've seen my 1930s coverage of Minolta's, you know, folding medium format camera. Olympus also made folding 35mm medium format cameras. But for their first effort, what I found unique with this one compared to the Minolta 35, which again took inspiration, let's just say, from Leica's, along with, you know, the Canon cameras and others, is that this is more of a unique own design. And what's really neat too with Olympus, and we will feature further Olympus cameras as we proceed to the subsequent decades, is the initial DNA of compactness that Olympus had right from the start. So this was a very popular camera, also made in fairly large quantities, featuring a 40mm f3.5 lens, shutter speeds from 1 second to 200th of a second, and you know, a beautiful little compact design with a great lens. So it sort of set the scene of the direction that Olympus would be heading. And then in Germany, as I mentioned, you know, Dresden got flattened by Allied bombing. Dresden had a lot of manufacturing for all sorts of different things, not just photography. That wasn't the reason it got bombed. It was its overall importance in German manufacturing and supporting the war effort. You know, so it took a little bit for Zeiss, which then relocated to West Germany after the war, to start coming out with cameras like this Zeiss Icon Ikonta, series camera, which again was a folding 35 millimeter camera. Sort of similar, I would say, to the Voigtlander in its approach. So again, this was for mass consumption, featuring a 45 millimeter Novar lens and shutter speeds from, let me see, 25 to 200. So, similarly oriented towards mass consumption. And then finally, so then what was happening in Dresden itself? And so Dresden fell into the East German partition, which was then overseen by the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union had a goal of, or a motive to take some of the camera manufacturing capabilities, sort of as spoils of war, and they pretty much assembled the Zeiss factory lines and moved them over to Kiev, Ukraine. Ukraine, of course, being part of the Soviet Union at the time. And so, this is a slightly later version, so it's not the immediate version of the Kiev-built Contax cameras. The two main, I guess, competitors for high-end cameras were Leica and Zeiss with their Contax lines. The reason these are important is because many other camera manufacturers took inspiration from either one of these. For example, Nikon coming out with their first camera, 1948, coming out with what subsequently was called the Nikon at the time, but then Nikon 1 subsequently. Of course, Nippon Kogaku was were established in the 1910s in manufacturing lenses. In fact, Canon, when they came out, they did not manufacture their own lenses. They were using Nippon or Nikon lenses. So Nippon came out with the Nikon in 1948, taking inspiration from Contax itself. Contax, though, had a very troublesome curtain shutter mechanism. Nikon smartly took Leica's shutter design for their particular cameras. But, right, so in terms of then Contax itself, it has a very interesting history. And if anybody is interested, I mean, you could have, I could have done an entire episode just on this single camera, and perhaps I will, to cover a little bit. But if anybody is interested, Mike Ekman recently put up a fascinating article about exactly what happened at the direct aftermath of World War II in Dresden, and the way that the Zeiss factory lines were initially reassembled right there in Dresden to make sure that they work, and they've manufactured a couple cameras that today are highly collectible, and then subsequently packaged the whole thing up, including with some of the workers, shipped them over to Kiev and reestablished it, and continue to manufacture these Kiev cameras on the original Contax design for a quite length, for a subsequent, decades. And, so very interesting sort of, tidbit there. So that wraps up our look at the 1940s. I'm hoping to, as I've mentioned, try out at least these two cameras from the series. I haven't had a chance to shoot with these others. I'll have to figure out which 35 millimeter camera I'm going to be shoot with. To be honest, the challenge is, of course, with these is getting functioning versions of them. I was hoping to try the Olympus 35, but I'm going to have to look at it. The issue is, too, as they sit around, this camera always worked for me, but sitting on the shelf, this has been with me for, I've had this camera for at least 2 decades. It was part of my original collection before I moved on to digital cameras. But so sitting on the shelf, unfortunately, the shutters get sticky. So I might need to take apart some of these and get them to work. But I'm hoping to at least shoot with 135mm and then these two medium format cameras. So please visit back and take a look at how images from these turn out. Thanks very much, and hope to see you soon.